Hello, Steve Snodgrass here, still acting president of the Omaha UFO Study Group, which is a community alliance group based out of the University of Nebraska at Omaha in Omaha, Nebraska. I am back with another presentation entitled The UFO-ET Hypothesis, Pseudoscience or Plausible. As you might expect in this presentation, I would like to describe my personal UFO-ET hypothesis, which happens to involve 9 steps, or what could be called sub-hypotheses. But in order to do that, I must first define what I mean by the 2 terms listed in this title. What is pseudoscience, and what makes my UFO-ET hypothesis plausible? I have decided to use the Wikipedia definition of pseudoscience, which is a composite definition from the Oxford English Dictionary, Hansen 2008, and noted skeptic Michael Shermer. It is a claim, belief, or practice that is presented as scientific, but does not adhere to a valid scientific method, lacks supporting evidence, lacks plausibility, cannot be reliably tested, or otherwise lacks what is known as scientific status, or what one could call street cred. UFOs and extraterrestrials sure sound like a pseudoscience to most people, but science does not jump to conclusions, so let's find out a few of those terms and unpack them, such as does not adhere to a scientific method. What is the scientific method anyway? In its simplest form, the scientific method involves these 5 things that all have feedback loops to them. First, you take a field of interest or segment of reality. As you communicate with other folks, you decide to make some observation and then refine it. As you continue to communicate with other people, you end up theorizing what are the possible things that it could explain your observation. Then, you make the almighty step to make a prediction or design a test that your theory would predict. You are ambivalent about the outcome and aspire to have complete objectivity along the way, allowing the data to lead you wherever it goes. In other words, you attempt to remain immune to preserving your reputation, worries about publishing to keep your job, and you're careful to avoid coming up with something too extraordinary or unorthodox so that you can remain an acceptable scientist, because that could cause your explanation to lack plausibility or acceptance. So, what are we to make of the word valid as it pertains to the scientific method? What makes one scientific method valid and another scientific method invalid? For that answer, we have to go to philosophy, specifically theories of logic and forms of logical reasoning. We find that a valid argument is one that draws a conclusion that is logically entailed by its premises. It doesn't matter whether the premises are actually true. That is a subject for a different debate. The question is whether and how an argument follows logical steps and has a logical form such that the conclusion is logically necessary. The old example, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, is a logically valid form. Whether all men are mortal and whether Socrates is a man makes no difference. If both of those statements are true, Socrates must be mortal. Yes, I know this isn't exactly how to draw a Venn diagram or a syllogism, but you get the idea. Here's another valid logical argument. If there were aliens, call that A, then they would leave evidence. Let's call that B. A, well, there are aliens, therefore B, they will leave evidence. That is a logically valid argument, but there are plenty of reasons to reject it, yes? One is by denying both the premises. Should we assume that if UFO-ETs are around, that they will leave evidence? Surely not. And should we accept the premise that there are UFOs and ETs? Absolutely not. But this is an example of a logically valid argument. Here is an example of an invalid argument, which is much more common than the previous one, actually. If aliens exist, then they will leave evidence. B. Well, actually, most skeptics would actually agree with that. But aha, there is no such thing as aliens to begin with. Not A. And most skeptics would agree with that too. There are no such thing as aliens or UFOs. So, a skeptic arrives at the conclusion that it is a waste of time to look for evidence since there's no way they exist in the first place. Does that sound like valid reasoning? Let me tell you that it is not. Regardless of whether the premises are true or not, this is invalid reasoning that results in what is called begging the question. If I turn on the light switch, the light will come on. Well, I did not turn on the light switch. Therefore, the light did not come on. Well, what if somebody else turned on the light switch or something else caused the light to come on? The conclusion is not entailed by the premises. Let's take some examples of some things that have been labeled as pseudoscience and examine if some of them are so-called plausible. The Flat Earth Society, no. Conversion therapy for homosexuals, no. Urine therapy, no thanks. Magnet therapy, I think I'll wait. You can see how plausible just means whether an idea is good enough for most people to believe. But hold on a minute. Water-fueled cars, why shouldn't we treat and experiment with the idea? Why shouldn't we try? Acupuncture? Surely there's something to that, but what? Phrenology? Locating bumps on the head? To indicate what brain function that area is responsible for? Well, actually, most of cognitive science, modern cognitive neuroscience, is still trying to study the brain from that point of view, and are finding that the brain doesn't work like that. The brain functions as a network of connections. It's not localized, whether it's bumps on the head or regions of the brain. Telekinesis, I'll get to that one later. Being fully conscious during the dream state? Well, absolutely. We have some functional magnetic resonance imaging that shows how it makes sense. Synesthesia? What is that, you say? Synesthesia is the example that I'd like to use to draw a parallel with my UFO-ET hypothesis. So think along with this example as we're examining UFOs and extraterrestrial claims. So-called synesthetes report that their senses seem to overlap in strange ways. They can see sounds or hear colors, or in a common example, letters and numbers have a most definite color hue in their appearance. Or something along the lines as a G major type of music will look blue to one synesthete and might look green to another. So here's some questions. Are these synesthetes lying? Are they crazy, or is it their imagination? Does their story change over time, and are they reluctant to talk about it? It turns out, no, they are not lying or crazy, nor is it their imagination. Their story doesn't change over time, and yes, they are very reluctant to talk about it for fear of people telling them there is something wrong with them. Why? Because it didn't seem plausible. So here are some scientific questions. Should the reports of synesthetes be considered evidence? Is it worth investigating, or should we just dismiss the whole idea? Most scientists would agree that it makes sense to get a room full of synesthetes, gather all their reports and compare their experiences to see what common underlying thing exists that could explain what they're experiencing. Lo and behold, that is just what science did. And when scientists did that, they discovered in the brain that there are overlapping neural processes and sense organs that we can observe. Science claims victory in arriving at a full and complete explanation. Or does it? We'll continue with that in part 2.